Everyone, it's Peter Kerr from Rock Daydream Nation. Today I've got a special guest, rock royalty Bob Daisley. How are you today, Bob?
I'm fine, thank you very much. Nice to talk to you.
Look, wonderful to talk to you, Bob. Over the last 3 weeks or so, over the summer break, I've been reading this For Fact's Sake,
Oh, right.
which came out in 2013, and it's a wonderful can't put me down sort of book. Bob, are you kind of still surprised at the reaction at this book?
Well, I am surprised, but it's what I hoped for. Obviously, it's. Um, I didn't want it to come out as a commercial product that would be on bookshelves for 3 months and then in a bargain basement after that for 2 bob.
Yeah,
But yeah, I've been in some ways, surprised, but certainly glad that it's had the so far the longevity that it's had, and it keeps going, and it does create interest, and there's a lot of questions answered in the book,
yeah,
that have been asked many times over the years, So
yeah,
but
absolutely.
most of the answers are in there, and each new print run, which is every sort of couple of years or whatever, when I get a few more thousand done, I just update the epilogue at the end to put people up to speed, sort of thing.
What's happening? What's
Yeah,
happening
what's
now?
happening? Yeah, and what's happened since the last update.
Yeah. Is there any scope for a sequel to the book? I mean, you kept very meticulous diaries. You've got actual dates, but I would imagine not everything in those diaries was put in this book. Is there scope for a sequel out of those original diaries to do kind of a part two?
Well, yes and no. I put most of the important stuff in that book,
Hmm.
although I did. If I'd have put every single event in it, it would have been sort of 3 volumes or something, and a lot more pages. And
Yep.
as it stood, it took me about 2 years to do that one. That was the actual writing of it, going through diaries, blah blah blah. Then the editing of it and corrections and taking bits out and throwing bits out. Just because it would have been so long and
Mm.
so big. Then I had to go through literally thousands of photos to narrow it down to, I think it's 380 photos in it or something.
What are the early takes I have in the book that I find a little bit of kind of a bit surprised is that you
Mhm.
had a little bit of indecision about joining Ritchie Blackmore's Rainbow out of Widowmaker.
Yeah.
He had a bit of an aura about being a band member killer. You know, do you think, did that play in your mind? Like, I've heard things about Ritchie and that may have affected your indecision about joining the band.
Yes, I'd been on the road with Widowmaker where we were doing our second American tour, and that was in '77. And I hooked up with an old mate of mine who'd used to play guitar with Mungo Jerry, Dick Middleton. Well, he was mates with Ritchie Blackmore. He was like, Dick was an old school player. He'd been with Johnny Halliday and Gene Vincent, and he knew Clapton and he knew Blackmore, and he's from that era and that school. And I went round to see Dick because he was having a holiday with his family in LA. And I went round to see Dick, and he said, "Oh, Richie's looking for a bass player. Would you be interested?" And I thought, yes, I would be. So, because things were a little shaky with Widowmaker, I think more personality wise, there was a lot of squabbles. There was even some fist fights, and it was getting silly, and it was annoying me. It was.
Mm,
So I went out one night with Richie and Dick Middleton, and we had a beer and a chat. And because Richie wanted to find out what people were like before he'd even auditioned them. So Richie invited me down for an audition. He knew we got on fine. So I went
yeah,
down, had a play with Rainbow, that was Cozy Powell and Ronnie James Dio, Ritchie Blackmore, and they had a new keyboard player, David Stone.
yep,
At the end of the audition, I think it was Ronnie that said to me, because they went off into an office somewhere and had a little chat, came back out, and they said, "Well, if you want it, the gig's yours." And I said to them, I'll think about it. They must have thought you jumped up, little fuck, you know, because it was a great opportunity. But, you know, Ritchie had the reputation of chewing people up and spitting them out, you know.
Yeah.
And people were saying to me, just be careful. You could leave Widowmaker and then go with Ritchie and then end up with nothing in 3 months. So I did have to think about it. But you know, I had a long conversation with my wife on the phone for about an hour where she was saying, "You got to do it. You got to do it. This is a great opportunity. There's no, you know, it's a no-brainer. You got to do this, you know." Anyway, I still hadn't made up my mind. And then we played at the Whiskey A Go-Go that night in LA with Widowmaker, and Ritchie came along with Cozy Powell. And after the show, I went up to the dressing room. Anyway, another fight broke out with Widowmaker. They were arguing and screaming and bitching, and I thought, oh, fuck this, you know.
Yeah.
And Ritchie told me before the show, he said, I'll be up at the Rainbow, which is the Rainbow Bar and Grill, just up the road from the Whiskey. He said, I'll be up there. Come and meet me up there. So when the squabbles broke out with Widowmaker, it kind of made the decision for me. You know, I didn't make the decision. I just thought, oh, you know, that's it. It's a sign to it's time to leave. So I said I'm going. I said to them, I packed up my bag, walked out. So I'm going up the Rainbow, and I meant up to the Rainbow and to join Rainbow. You know, sort of like that. So I walked in, and Ritchie was sat at a table in the Rainbow, and as I walked in, he applauded, and I thought, wow, that's amazing. That you know, Ritchie Blackmore was not one for you know, giving compliments or anything easily or taking it lightly. So for him to applaud as I walked in, I thought, oh, I've done something right.
Yeah.
So I joined Rainbow that night at his table. I said, okay, count me in, and we started rehearsals the next day.
That's fantastic. Do you think that, you know, you didn't seem to have many problems with Ritchie? Do you think it's just because your personalities clicked?
Yes, and plus I knew the situation. It was head down, shoulder to the wheel, get on with it, be professional, be reliable, and don't start bitching about anything. Just get on with it. And I did, and that was fine. That's all you really needed to do with Ritchie, you know, is do the job right, be conscientious, be reliable, be professional. And I didn't have a problem with him.
Yeah. But he seemed to have an issue against keyboard players. I read with interest there was a bit of a hierarchy.
Yes.
And I've read a lot of interviews with David Stone. Even to this day, he seems to harbour a bit of a grudge about Ritchie this, Ritchie that. So, yeah.
There was a funny thing. I don't know what it was, but Ritchie and keyboard players, I don't know. I don't know if maybe in the earlier days with Purple, that John Lord gave him a hard time, but I knew John Lord well, you know. I couldn't see John being like that, you know, with Ritchie. So where that came from, I don't know, but I know he gave David Stone a hard time, and Tony Carey, the original keyboard player of Rainbow, he gave him a hard time as well. So
I think he traumatized Tony. There's been many interviews with Tony being traumatized by Ritchie. When you laid down the tracks for Long Live Rock and Roll, the album, you did 4 and you did one song as a band. Did you do multiple takes?
Takes of the same song?
Yeah, takes.
That was Gates of Babylon and Kill the King.
Yeah.
That they were done. But the weird thing is that they put Cozy in a different room, and we had like a TV camera and a screen, so I could see him that way. But it just felt different to being in the room with him. You know, it felt a bit weird. And actually, I think Kill the King may have been recorded, and I put a bass on it, and I did that at the board at the desk.
Yeah,
that felt weird too. That was the first time I'd done that. So.
But were they a multiple take type of band? Because I heard like Stargazer was just done in 2 takes.
Yeah, it was more like that. It was like rehearse it, get it right. Okay, let's take it. We'll do another take, and it was sort of like that. No, there wasn't lots of takes.
Yeah.
Of the same song. So it was a couple of the songs that Ritchie had played bass on. because the
Yep.
bass player they had, Ritchie got rid of him, and then Ritchie played bass on some tracks in between getting me. So when I went in, I did a few tracks, and the rest. One track didn't have bass on it. That was Rainbow Eyes, and the rest I did, and the others Ritchie had already done.
Yeah. Were there any rehearsal ideas or jamming other songs? Is there anything in the can, you think, that's in some archive somewhere out of those
You
sessions?
mean with Rainbow?
Yeah, that you
Not
worked
really.
on that
No,
album.
I have rehearsal tapes, and some of the songs that I have were released on a Rainbow album as bonus material a few years
Yep.
ago.
Yep.
Um, but all the songs are really just from the rehearsals. So there's no sort of new songs that we haven't heard before.
Yep.
As like, let's do something with this because no one's ever heard it. But they were just rehearsal tapes of those songs. So I used to
Yep.
record the rehearsals, take them back to my hotel, and then practice along with them and make sure I had
Yep.
all the parts right, and that's how I had them.
Yeah. I liked your reference to Ritchie as an amazing guitarist, but as a bass player, he was an amazing guitarist.
Well, yeah.
Um, what do you think is the main difference between a guitarist moonlighting as a bass player and the real thing?
Um, I, I don't know. I think if you become a bass player, because some of the great bass players have started out on guitar. I mean,
Yep.
Paul McCartney started out on guitar. John Entwistle started out on guitar. I think, Ronnie Wood, he started out on guitar and played bass. He was a great bass player too.
Mm.
There's
Yep.
been a lot of great bass players that started out on guitar. Um, but if you concentrate on just being a bass player, you tend to start to think as a bass player rather than as a guitarist. And Ritchie was technically and precise in his playing, but he didn't think like a bass player and put in sort of passing notes or other bits that would be considered bass playing. Sort of, he just sort of followed the song on a bass to. I don't know. It's difficult to put into words, but
Do you think it's a feel thing? Like
well,
I mean, you've got a
yeah,
feel for the bass.
partially a
Yeah.
feel thing too. Yeah,
Yeah.
and I think you do have to be thinking bass, be a bass player in your head. Like
Yep.
I was about 14 when I first saw a band with an electric bass in it, and I thought, wow, it just got me. It hit me in my heart, sort of thing. I thought that's what I want to do. I was playing guitar. I started out learning guitar at guitar lessons, and one week the guitar teacher brought in a little band with a rhythm guitar and a lead guitar and an electric bass and drums. And I say electric bass because in those days, it was 1964, electric bass was still relatively new. Some bands still had an upright double bass. But when I
Yep.
when I heard the electric bass, I thought, wow, I just loved it. It just felt to me like it was the backbone, the spine of the music, the throbbing heart. It was just the guts and the emotion, and I thought that's what I want to do. And
That's
that
why
was
you've got some lifelong relationships or friends with drummers because they're in the pocket with you. You're
yes,
like a band of brothers, so to
yeah,
speak.
yeah,
Like with Lee, which we'll talk
yes,
about.
yeah, yeah. As soon as Lee and I started playing together, we knew it. There was something there, and we just
Yeah.
like, yeah, clicked.
Uh, in your book, you talk about in 1997 that you were looking at putting Rainbow back together or
Yeah,
proposing to put Rainbow back together.
yeah.
With hindsight, do you think that would have worked with the public in 1997?
I think it would have created enough interest because there was enough Rainbow fans out there that certainly would have loved to have seen that. I'd spoken to Cozy, I'd spoken to Ronnie, and I think Ronnie had spoken to Ritchie, and everybody was like, "Yes, let's do this." I don't know what keyboard player it would have been. It could maybe Don Airy. I don't know. We didn't really
Yeah.
discuss that, but the four of us discussed the idea of putting Rainbow back together, doing an album, and maybe some shows or whatever, and it was becoming, we'd got the green light, sort of thing. Okay, let's
Yeah.
do it. And then Cozy was killed,
Yeah, that's
And we couldn't have done it without him. That was it. That was the end of that.
yeah. Do you have a view on the latest Rainbow incarnation that Ritchie did with Ronnie Romero and the folk from Blackmore's Night? Do you have any views on that outfit?
Well, I thought it was good, and it was nice to see Richie playing that stuff again. Um,
Hmm.
if I had any, well, it's not a criticism, but I just thought when Richie was talking about the singer, he said, "Oh, he's better than Ronnie." But it was just, I just thought, no,
Yeah,
this guy's good, and Ronnie was good, and they're different, and it's not a matter of who's better or who's best. That they were different singers, and they were both good.
yeah,
It's like I get asked so many times, who's the best guitar player you ever played with? Because I've played with so many of the greats. But I don't think there is a best. There's people who are right for the gig, and uh, you could say, oh, okay, you've played with Ingve, and you've played with Steve Morse and Steve Vai and Randy Rhoads and Ritchie Blackmore. Now, who's the best? There is no best.
yeah,
It's just who's right for the time. It's like you could put Randy Rhoads in the Beatles and say, oh, he's a better guitar player than George Harrison, but is he? No, George Harrison was the right guitar player for the
yeah,
Beatles. I think it's a bit like that.
yeah. Um, in your book, you don't have a lot of regrets, but I get a bit of a feeling about Rainbow that it's kind of a little bit unfulfilled. You would have loved to had one more album with them. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah, yeah, it
Just
was.
to continue one more year, just to see
Yeah,
how it would have
it
gone?
kind of ground to a halt. It got to a point where it was just floundering. I came back to London, and I was waiting to hear what was going on, and nobody seemed to know anything, and there wasn't any sort of word from Ritchie, and there was no word from the manager or anything. And then Ronnie Dio phoned me,
Mm,
and he said that he was out of Rainbow, and he said, "And I don't think this version of Rainbow is going to continue." And I thought, oh dear, nobody really. There was one time when Ronnie and I were waiting to go to do a sound check in the afternoon on the Rainbow tour in America, and Ronnie said to me, "If this band disbands or it doesn't continue, would you consider getting a band together with me?" And I said, "Yeah, sure." So,
yeah,
when Ronnie phoned me in London and he said he was out of the band and he was going to put his own band together, and he said that version of Rainbow wasn't going to continue. So I said, yeah, okay, then count me in. And he said, I'll start looking for guitarists and keyboard players, and I've got a record company in mind, and blah, blah, blah. Don't do anything. Hold tight, I'll be back in touch. And he
yeah,
would phone every few weeks, he'd phone and say, I'm still on the case, blah, blah, blah. And so I wasn't really looking for anything. I didn't really sort of try
yeah.
to, do anything else. So I was just waiting. And then one day I walked up the street. We lived in Holland Park, and I walked up the Holland Park Avenue, and I got I think it might have been Melody Maker, one of the music papers. And on the front page it said Ronnie James Dio joins Black Sabbath, and I thought, oh,
Mm,
thanks for telling me.
yeah, great.
Yeah, but that was that. He joined Sabbath,